The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner buzzed overhead as I wiped down the same table for the third time, my hands moving mechanically while my mind churned with worry. The dinner rush had ended hours ago, leaving only the lingering smell of coffee and the weight of unpaid bills pressing down on my shoulders. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the man slide into the corner booth until he cleared his throat. He was nothing like our usual customers. Expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and an air of authority that made the shabby diner seem even more worn around the edges. When I approached with my order pad, he didn't ask for coffee or pie. Instead, he spoke words that would change everything. "Miss Torres, my name is Vincent Castellano. I represent a client who has a proposition for you." My pen froze midair. Nobody knew my last name here. I was just Lena to everyone, the girl who worked double shifts and kept to herself. "I think you have the wrong person," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your brother Miguel is at St. Mary's Hospital, stage 4 leukemia. The bills are mounting, and your insurance won't cover the experimental treatment he needs." Each word hit like a physical blow. "My client is prepared to offer you a solution." I sank into the booth across from him, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. What kind of solution? Marriage. The word hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. A legal contract, fully compensated. 1 year of your life in exchange for complete financial security, for you and your brother. That's insane. But even as I said it, I was thinking of Miguel's pale face, the machines keeping him alive, the crushing weight of medical debt that grew larger every day. The arrangement is simple. You marry my client, live in his home, fulfill the basic requirements of a spouse in public settings. In return, all medical expenses are covered immediately, plus a substantial personal settlement. He slid a business card across the table. The marriage can be dissolved after 1 year if both parties agree. Who is he, your client? A businessman who values privacy. You'll meet him after the ceremony. After the ceremony. The words sent ice through my veins. You're asking me to marry a complete stranger. I'm offering you a way to save your brother's life. His voice was gentle but final. You have 24 hours to decide, Miss Torres. The offer expires at midnight tomorrow. He stood, leaving only his card and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. I stared at the embossed letters, Castellano and Associates, until they blurred. 24 hours to choose between my freedom and Miguel's life. It wasn't really a choice at all. The hospital corridors felt endless as I made my way to Miguel's room the next morning. The smell of antiseptic couldn't mask the underlying scent of fear and hope that permeated every surface. Through the door, I could see my 22-year-old brother, once vibrant and full of dreams, now thin and fragile against the white sheets. "Hey, sunshine," he whispered as I entered, using the nickname he'd given me as a child. His smile was weak but genuine. "You look tired. You don't have to visit every day, you know." "Don't be ridiculous." I arranged the flowers I'd brought, cheap carnations from the grocery store, but they added a splash of color to the sterile room. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I could run a marathon." His laugh turned into a cough that shook his whole body. When it passed, his eyes were serious. "Lena, I know the bills are piling up. The nurses think I don't listen, but I hear them talking. Don't worry about that. I'm handling it. With what money? You're working yourself to death at that diner, and it's still not enough." He gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't do anything crazy trying to save me." The irony of his words nearly broke me. If only he knew what crazy looked like. A marriage contract with a stranger, a leap into the unknown. But looking at his face, at the hope he was trying to hide behind resignation, I knew I'd already made my decision. That evening, I sat in my tiny apartment with Castellano's card in one hand and a pen in the other. The contract he'd delivered was thick, full of legal terminology I didn't understand, but the key points were clear. 1 year of marriage, complete discretion, and enough money to give Miguel the best care available. I thought of all the things I'd dreamed of. Finishing college, maybe traveling, finding love on my own terms. Then I thought of Miguel's laugh, the way he used to dance around our kitchen when we were kids, how he'd held me when our parents died. Some dreams were worth sacrificing for the people you love. I signed my name with a trembling hand just before midnight. The courthouse was gray and imposing, Nothing like the wedding I'd imagined as a little girl. No white dress, no flowers, no family, just me in my best black dress, and Castellano in his expensive suit. The witnesses were strangers who avoided eye contact, and the officiant rushed through the ceremony like he had somewhere more important to be. "Where is he?" I whispered to Castellano as we waited. "My husband? He'll be in touch soon." Some business required his immediate attention. Business. Even the word sounded ominous in his mouth. What kind of man conducts business instead of attending his own wedding? What kind of life was I stepping into? The vows were standard, impersonal. When the officiant asked if I took this man to be my husband, I said I do to an empty space beside me, my voice echoing in the sterile room. The ring they placed on my finger was beautiful, a simple band with small diamonds that caught the harsh fluorescent light. It felt heavy, foreign, like wearing someone else's life. "Congratulations, Mrs. Moretti," Castellano said as we signed the final papers. The name felt strange on my tongue, Lena Moretti. I'd become someone new without even meeting the man who'd made it possible. "What happens now?" "Now you go home, pack what you need. A car will pick you up at 6. "Where am I going?" His smile was enigmatic. "Your husband awaits." The black sedan that arrived at my building was unlike anything I'd ever seen up close. Sleek, expensive, with windows so dark I couldn't see inside. The driver was a mountain of a man who introduced himself simply as Marco. He loaded my single suitcase into the trunk without comment, then held the door open with surprising gentleness. As we pulled away from my neighborhood, I watched my old life disappear in the side mirror. The familiar streets gave way to unfamiliar ones, then to winding roads that climbed into the hills overlooking the city. With each mile, my heart beat faster. What had I gotten myself into? The mansion appeared like something from a movie, all stone and glass and impossible grandeur, perched on a cliff with the ocean stretching endlessly beyond. Iron gates opened at our approach, closing behind us with a finality that made my stomach clench. This wasn't just wealth. This was power, the kind that built fortresses and kept the world at bay. Marco led me through marble halls, lined with art that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. Staff members appeared and disappeared like ghosts, nodding respectfully, but never quite meeting my eyes. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the click of my heels on the polished floor. "He's waiting in the library," Marco said, stopping before massive oak doors. "Good luck, Mrs. Moretti." I pushed open the doors and stepped into my new life. Adrian Moretti stood with his back to me, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the sunset over the Pacific. Even from behind, he was imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a stillness that suggested coiled power. When he turned, I felt the air leave my lungs. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair perfectly styled, eyes so blue they seemed to see straight through me. But it was more than his looks that made my pulse quicken. It was the way he moved, like a predator who knew he owned everything he surveyed, including me. "So," he said, his voice low and rich with an accent I couldn't quite place, "you're the woman brave enough to marry a stranger." "Desperate enough," I corrected, surprised by my own boldness. "Let's not romanticize what this is." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, maybe, or respect. "Fair enough, I'm Adrian Moretti. Welcome to your new home. What kind of business are you in, Mr. Moretti?" "The kind that requires discretion." He moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. "But you don't need to worry about that. Your job is much simpler." "Which is?" "Be my wife. In public, in private, whenever it's required. Can you do that, Lena?" The way he said my name sent shivers down my spine. "I can try." "Good." He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. "Because there's no going back now. Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti." The next morning, I woke in a bedroom larger than my entire apartment, surrounded by luxury I'd only dreamed of. Silk sheets, fresh flowers, a view of the ocean that took my breath away. For a moment, I almost forgot this was a prison, however gilded. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. A woman entered, middle-aged, kind-faced, with gentle eyes that seemed to understand everything without words. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti. I'm Elena, the head housekeeper. Mr. Moretti asked me to show you around and explain how things work here. As we toured the mansion, Elena's explanations felt more like warnings wrapped in politeness. Certain wings were off limits. Meals were served at specific times. Guests were not permitted without prior approval. The pool area was available during daylight hours only. Each rule felt like another bar on my beautiful cage. And the phones? I asked, noticing the lack of landlines. Cell service can be spotty up here, Elena said carefully. Mr. Moretti prefers that all communication go through him or Marco for security reasons. Security, another word that seemed to carry hidden weight in this house. That evening, Adrian found me on the terrace, watching the sun set over the water. He'd changed from his morning suit into dark jeans and a white shirt that somehow made him look both more casual and more dangerous. Elena gave you the tour? She did. Quite a few rules for a home. They're for your protection. He settled into the chair beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. This isn't the kind of life where you can simply wander wherever you please. What kind of life is it? Instead of answering, he handed me a glass of wine, something red and expensive that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Tell me about yourself, Lena, beyond the hospital bills and the desperate circumstances. There's not much to tell. I've been working since I was 16, taking care of Miguel, trying to keep us afloat. I took a sip of the wine, feeling it warm my throat. What about you? How does someone end up living in a fortress by the sea? Family business. His smile was enigmatic. Passed down through generations. It requires a certain commitment. That's a very vague answer. I'm a very private man. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. But I'll tell you this, I didn't choose this marriage lightly, Lena. I need a wife, and you need financial security. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Need a wife? For what? Stability, legitimacy. There are certain expectations in my world. His fingers brushed against mine as he reached for his glass, the contact electric. A married man is seen as more trustworthy, more settled. It opens doors that remain closed to bachelors. The way he said my world made it sound like somewhere far removed from ordinary life. And maybe it was. Maybe I'd married into something I couldn't even comprehend yet. Dinner tomorrow night, he said, standing. There are people I want you to meet. Elena will make sure you have something appropriate to wear. What kind of people? Business associates, friends. The kind of people who need to see that Adrian Moretti has a beautiful, devoted wife. His hand touched my shoulder briefly, possessively. Think you can play the part? I looked up at him, this stranger who was now my husband, and felt something dangerous stirring in my chest. I suppose we'll find out. The restaurant Adrian chose was the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves, prices that weren't even listed on the menu. I felt like an imposter in the designer dress Elena had procured, but Adrian's hand on my back as he guided me through the dining room made me feel protected, claimed. His associates were exactly what I'd expected. Wealthy, well-dressed men with sharp eyes and careful smiles. Their wives were perfectly polished, with practiced conversation and knowing looks. I played my part, letting Adrian order for me, leaning into his touch when he rested his hand on my thigh under the table. So Adrian, one of the men said over brandy, how did you manage to keep this beauty secret for so long? Some things are worth waiting for, Adrian replied smoothly, his arm tightening around my waist. When you find the right woman, you don't hesitate. The right woman, as if this had anything to do with love or choice. But the way he looked at me when he said it, the heat in his eyes, made my pulse quicken, despite myself. As the evening progressed, I began to notice things. The deference with which the staff treated Adrian. The careful way his associates chose their words. The brief tense moment when another group of men entered the restaurant, and Adrian's entire demeanor shifted, becoming watchful, predatory. We should go, he murmured in my ear, his hand sliding to the small of my back. Now. I didn't question it, just let him guide me toward the exit. But I felt the weight of watching eyes, the subtle tension that followed us out into the night. In the car, Adrian was quiet, his jaw set in hard lines. What was that about, I asked. Business rivals, nothing for you to worry about. But his hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing gently. You did well tonight. Very convincing. Convincing. The word stung, even though it shouldn't have. This was all pretense after all. But sitting in the dark beside him, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, it was getting harder to remember where the performance ended and something real began. The days began to blur together in a routine of luxury and limitation. I had everything I could want: designer clothes, gourmet meals, a staff that catered to my every need. But I was constantly aware of the invisible walls around me. Phone calls were monitored. My movements were tracked. Even my visits to Miguel had to be scheduled through Marco. It was during one of these visits that I began to understand the true scope of Adrian's world. Miguel looked better than he had in months. Color in his cheeks, strength in his voice. The experimental treatment was working, and the private room he'd been moved to was a far cry from the overcrowded ward where I'd first found him. "This is incredible, Lena," he said, squeezing my hand. "I don't know how you managed it, but thank you." "Just focus on getting better," I told him, pushing down the guilt that threatened to overwhelm me. "That's all that matters." But as I left the hospital, I noticed the black SUV that followed at a discreet distance. Protection, Adrian had called it. It felt more like surveillance. That night, I decided to explore the mansion more thoroughly. Most of the rooms Elena had shown me were public spaces. The library, the sitting rooms, the formal dining room. But there were entire wings I hadn't seen. Corridors that seemed to stretch into shadows. I was making my way down one such hallway when I heard voices. Low, urgent, speaking in rapid Italian. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. "Santoro family is getting restless," one voice said in accented English. "They think the marriage is a sign of weakness, that you're going soft. Let them think what they want." Adrian's voice was cold, dangerous. A man with a wife to protect is more motivated, not less. They'll learn that soon enough. And if they don't, then we remind them why the Moretti name is still feared in this city. I backed away carefully, my heart pounding. Moretti name. Feared. The pieces were starting to come together, painting a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see clearly. But it was too late now. I'd heard too much, seen too much. And I was beginning to realize that my marriage wasn't just about money and convenience. I was part of something larger, something dangerous, and I had no idea how deep it went. Adrian found me on the terrace an hour later, staring out at the dark ocean. He approached quietly, but I felt his presence like electricity in the air. "Trouble sleeping?" he asked, settling beside me, just thinking. I turned to look at him, this beautiful, dangerous man I'd married. About what kind of business requires bodyguards and bulletproof cars? His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "What makes you think my car is bulletproof?" "Marco told me. Said it was a necessary precaution in your line of work." I faced him fully now, searching his face. "What line of work is that exactly, Adrian?" For a long moment, he was silent. Then he reached out, touching my cheek with surprising gentleness. "The kind where a man's enemies might use his wife to hurt him. The kind where innocence is a luxury I can't afford to give you. Are you in danger?" "I'm always in danger. It's the price of power." His thumb traced along my jawline, sending shivers through me. "But I'm very good at what I do, Lena. And now I have something worth protecting. Something worth protecting." The words sent heat through my veins, even as they terrified me. Because somewhere between the rules and the restrictions, the luxury and the lies, I was starting to care what happened to him too. "Stay out of what you don't understand," he warned softly, "for both our sakes." But it was already too late for that. I was in too deep, and we both knew it. The invitation arrived the next morning. Elegant script on expensive paper, requesting the pleasure of Mr. and Mrs. Moretti's company at an exclusive club downtown. Adrian's expression darkened as he read it. "Decline," he told Marco curtly. "With respect, sir, that might be seen as a slight. After the restaurant incident." "Fine." Adrian's jaw was tight with frustration. "But extra security, full detail." "What restaurant incident?" I asked as Marco left to make arrangements. "Nothing you need to worry about." But his answer was too quick, too dismissive. The club was everything I'd expected. Old money, older power, the kind of place where deals were made in quiet corners over expensive whiskey. Adrian kept me close, his hand possessive on my waist as he navigated the crowd of suited men and diamond-draped women. I was beginning to recognize the pattern now. The careful way people approached us, the deference mixed with wariness, the conversations that stopped abruptly when we walked by. Whatever Adrian was, whoever he was, his presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure. We were seated at a private table when I saw him, a silver-haired man with cold eyes who watched Adrian with barely concealed hatred. Their gazes met across the room, and I felt the temperature drop several degrees. "Friend of yours?" I asked quietly. "Hardly." Adrian's smile was sharp as glass. "Vincent Santoro. He's been trying to muscle into our territory for months." Our territory, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The confrontation came later, as we were leaving. Santoro appeared in the narrow alley beside the club, flanked by two men built like refrigerators. Adrian moved instinctively, placing himself between the threat and me. "Moretti," Santoro said, his voice carrying the weight of old grudges. "Heard you got married. Pretty little thing." "Stay away from my wife," Adrian replied, his voice deadly quiet. "Or what? You'll hide behind your lawyers and accountants?" Santoro laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "You've gone soft, Adrian. Marriage will do that to a man." "You want to test that theory?" The violence erupted so quickly I barely had time to scream. One of Santoro's men rushed forward, knife glinting in the dim light. Adrian moved like liquid shadow, deflecting the blade and driving his elbow into the man's throat. A sickening crack echoed off the alley walls. The second attacker came at me, and I found myself backed against the brick wall, terror freezing my blood. But Adrian was there before the man could reach me, his fist connecting with devastating precision. Bone crunched, and the attacker crumpled. Santoro had drawn a gun, but Adrian was faster. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the older man and had him pressed against the wall, the weapon now pointed at Santoro's temple. "This is who I am, Lena," Adrian said, without taking his eyes off his enemy. His voice was calm, controlled, but I could see the predator beneath the civilized surface. "This is what your husband does." For a terrifying moment, I thought he might pull the trigger. But then sirens wailed in the distance, and Adrian stepped back, letting Santoro fall to his knees. "Next time you want to test me," Adrian said conversationally, "remember that I have more to protect now. That makes me more dangerous, not less." He took my arm gently, leading me away from the carnage as if we'd just finished a pleasant dinner. In the car, I sat in stunned silence, replaying the scene over and over. The speed, the brutality, the cold efficiency with which he dismantled 3 armed men. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tender now, concerned. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. My hands were shaking, adrenaline still coursing through my system. But underneath the fear was something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely, something that felt dangerously like attraction. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he continued, reaching for my hand. "But I need you to understand, this is my world, Lena. It's violent and unforgiving, and the only way to survive is to be stronger than everyone else. You could have killed him. Yes. No hesitation, no remorse. Would that have bothered you?" The question hung between us as we drove through the night, city lights blurring past the windows. Would it have bothered me? A month ago, the answer would have been obvious. But now, after seeing the cold calculation in Santoro's eyes, after feeling genuine fear for my life, I wasn't so sure. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Good," he said, surprising me. "That means you're learning." "Learning what? To accept violence as a tool? To find comfort in my husband's capacity for brutality?" The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my belly, and I knew I was in more trouble than I'd ever imagined. The mansion felt different after that night, smaller somehow, despite its sprawling size. Security was increased, with armed guards patrolling the grounds and new locks installed on doors I'd never noticed before. My world, already constrained, shrank even further. "It's temporary," Adrian assured me as Marco programmed new codes into the security system. "Until the Santoro situation is resolved." "How will it be resolved?" His smile was cold. "Permanently." I spent the next few days in a strange limbo, caught between luxury and captivity. My phone had been confiscated for security reasons. cutting off my last link to the outside world beyond supervised visits to Miguel. The staff, once friendly, now moved with nervous efficiency, as if they too sensed the danger closing in. It was Elena who finally broke, her composure cracking as she helped me dress for another carefully orchestrated dinner. "Mrs. Moretti," she said quietly, her hands trembling as she fastened my necklace. "I've worked for this family for 15 years. I've seen what happens when the violence comes home. What are you trying to tell me? That you need to be very careful. There are people who would use you to hurt him, and people who would hurt you to protect him. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." Her words echoed in my mind as I made my way to dinner, passing guards who nodded respectfully but watched me with sharp eyes. Was I a wife or a prisoner? A partner or a pawn? The lines had blurred beyond recognition. Adrian was waiting in the dining room, impeccable in a dark suit that emphasized his dangerous elegance. But there was tension in his shoulders, stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Everything all right?" I asked as he seated me. "Fine." The lie came too easily. "Just business." Over dinner, he was distracted, his attention constantly drawn to the phone that buzzed insistently against the table. Finally, he excused himself to take a call, leaving me alone with the growing certainty that something was very wrong. I'd started back to my room when I heard raised voices from Adrian's study. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see him pacing behind his desk, while Marco stood at rigid attention. "Santoro's moving faster than we anticipated," Marco was saying. "Our sources say he's planning something big." "Let him come," Adrian replied, his voice deadly calm. "We'll be ready." "What about Mrs. Moretti? She's become a liability." The words hit me like a physical blow. A liability. All this time, I'd been thinking of myself as protected, cherished even. But to them, I was just another problem to be managed. "Lena is not a liability," Adrian said sharply. "She's my wife." "A wife you married for strategic reasons," Marco countered. "The contract can be dissolved, and she can be relocated somewhere safe." "The contract stays intact." Adrian's tone brooked no argument. "She stays with me." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. The contract. Of course, there were provisions for ending the marriage early, probably clauses I'd never read, stipulations that protected their interests while leaving me with nothing. I'd been naive to think this was anything more than a business arrangement with an expiration date. But Adrian had defended me, hadn't he? Insisted I stay, despite the risk. The memory of his voice saying she's my wife sent conflicting emotions churning through me. Gratitude, hope, and underneath it all, the growing fear that I was falling for a man who saw me as nothing more than a useful asset. I made it to my room before the tears came, hot and bitter with realization. I'd been playing house with a stranger, pretending that luxury could substitute for love, that protection was the same as caring. The truth was harsher. I was convenient, decorative, a tool in a game I didn't understand. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the ocean beyond my window. Somewhere in the darkness, Miguel was sleeping peacefully in his hospital bed, saved by money that came with strings I was only beginning to understand. How far would I go to keep him safe? How much of myself was I willing to sacrifice? By morning, I'd made my decision. Elena found me packing the few personal items I'd brought with me, my movements sharp with determination. "Mrs. Moretti," she asked carefully, "is everything all right? I need to get word to my brother. Tell him I'm going away for a while, but that his care won't be affected." I folded the designer dresses into my suitcase with unnecessary force. "And I need transportation to the city." "I'm not sure that's possible. Mr. Moretti's orders." "I'm not a prisoner, Elena. Despite appearances, I still have free will." I turned to face her, seeing my own fear reflected in her kind eyes. "Unless you're telling me I don't." The silence stretched between us before she finally nodded. "There's a service entrance that the gardeners use. If you were to walk down to the main road at, say, 3 o'clock, when the shift changes." "Thank you." She hesitated at the door. "He cares about you, you know. More than he should. More than is safe. That's what makes this so dangerous." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, my resolve wavering. Did Adrian care about me? Or was I simply a possession he was reluctant to give up? The distinction mattered more than I wanted to admit. At 3 o'clock, I slipped out through the gardens, my heart hammering against my ribs. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, the first natural light I'd felt in days. For a moment, I almost turned back. But then I thought of Marco's words: liability, contract, dissolution, and I kept walking. The black SUV appeared just as I reached the main road, moving too fast, with too much purpose. My blood turned to ice as it screeched to a halt beside me, and Vincent Santoro stepped out with that same cold smile I remembered from the club. "Mrs. Moretti," he said pleasantly, as if we'd met at a charity luncheon. "Going somewhere?" I tried to run, but his men were faster. Strong hands grabbed my arms, and before I could scream, a cloth was pressed over my face. The world went gray around the edges, then black. I woke up in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, my head pounding and my mouth dry as dust. Santoro sat across from me in a metal chair, looking perfectly at ease despite our grim surroundings. "Ah, you're awake. Good. I was beginning to worry we'd used too much chloroform." "What do you want?" My voice came out as a croak. "To have a conversation about your husband. You see, Mrs. Moretti, I don't think you fully understand what kind of man you married." He leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. "Adrian Moretti is the head of one of the most powerful crime families on the West Coast. Drugs, weapons, money laundering. If it's illegal and profitable, the Morettis have their fingers in it." The words shouldn't have been a surprise, but hearing them spoken aloud made them real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. Crime family, Mafia. The pieces I'd been collecting finally formed a complete picture, and it was more terrifying than I'd imagined. "And you," Santoro continued, "are his greatest weakness. A naive little waitress who stumbled into a world she doesn't understand. Do you know why he really married you, my dear? Money. I needed money for my brother's treatment. Partially true, but there's more." He pulled out a folder, spreading photographs across the table between us. "Your marriage wasn't just convenient, it was strategic. The Moretti family has been under federal investigation for years. A respectable wife, a sick brother, a touching story of love conquering all. It's the perfect cover for a man trying to legitimize his image." The photos showed me and Adrian at various events: the restaurant, the club, walking through the mansion grounds. In every image, I looked happy, devoted, completely convinced of my own fairy tale. "You were never a wife, Lena. You were a prop. A pretty little actress in Adrian's elaborate performance." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You're lying." "Am I? Then why hasn't he told you the truth about his business? Why all the secrets, the security, the careful management of your every move?" Santoro's voice was gentle, almost paternal. "Face it, child, you've been played by a master." The warehouse door burst open before I could respond, and Adrian strode in like an avenging angel. His suit was torn, his knuckles bloody, and his eyes blazed with fury I'd never seen before. Marco and several other men flanked him, all armed and ready for war. "Let her go, Santoro," Adrian commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Or what? You'll kill me in front of your innocent little bride?" Santoro gestured to me with mock concern. "I'm afraid she's learned some disturbing truths about her marriage. Haven't you, my dear?" I looked at Adrian then, really looked at him, and saw the truth written in his face. The guilt, the regret, the knowledge that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. Everything Santoro had said was true, and Adrian knew I knew it. "Lena," he said, my name a prayer on his lips. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" "That our entire marriage is a lie? That I'm nothing more than a convenient cover story?" The words came out bitter, laced with betrayal and heartbreak. "How many federal agents have you fooled with your devoted wife act, Adrian?" "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said, taking a step toward me. "It started as business, yes, but nothing." I stood, my legs shaking but my voice steady. "I've heard enough lies." Santoro smiled triumphantly. "You see, Adrian? Your perfect little wife isn't so loyal after all. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement." Adrian moved faster than thought, his gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. The shot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, and Santoro crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder. "The arrangement," Adrian said conversationally, "is that you leave my city, leave my business, and never come near my wife again. The next shot won't be a warning." Chaos erupted as Santoro's men went for their weapons, But Adrian's crew was ready. Gunfire echoed off the concrete walls, and I found myself pressed against Adrian's chest as he shielded me from the violence. His heart was pounding against my ear, his arms steel bands around my waist. "Stay down," he murmured, his breath warm against my hair. "It's almost over." When the shooting stopped, 3 men lay dead, and Santoro was being dragged away by his surviving soldiers, his blood leaving a dark trail on the concrete floor. Adrian pulled back to look at me, his hands gentle on my face. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The man who had just executed 3 people with clinical precision was touching me like I was made of glass, his eyes soft with genuine concern. "I'm taking you home," he said, gathering me against his side. "I don't have a home," I whispered. "I don't know what's real anymore. We'll figure it out." His lips brushed my temple. A promise and an apology rolled into one. "I swear to you, Lena, we'll figure it out." But as he led me away from the carnage, I looked back over my shoulder and whispered the words that would haunt us both. "I don't trust you anymore." The ride back to the mansion passed in silence, but it was the kind of quiet that preceded storms. Adrian sat rigid beside me, his jaw clenched with the effort of holding back words that might shatter what little remained between us. I stared out the window at the city lights, feeling like a stranger in my own life. At the mansion, I went straight to my room and locked the door. I needed time to think, to process everything I'd learned, to decide what came next. But Adrian wasn't willing to give me that luxury. His knock came 20 minutes later, soft but insistent. "Lena, we need to talk. I don't want to hear any more lies." "Then you'll hear the truth. All of it." There was a pause, then the sound of a key turning in the lock. Of course he had keys to every room in his own house. "I'm coming in." He looked haggard, older somehow, as if the events of the day had aged him years in a matter of hours. He'd changed out of his blood-stained suit into jeans and a sweater, but he couldn't shed the weight of what he was, what he'd done. "You're right," he said without preamble. "The marriage was strategic. The Moretti family has been under federal scrutiny for decades, and a stable personal life was part of my effort to legitimize our operations." "So Santoro was telling the truth?" "Part of it." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving my face. "But not all of it." "Then tell me the rest." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human it caught me off guard. "My grandfather built this empire through violence and fear. My father expanded it through cunning and careful alliances. I inherited a machine that runs on blood and money, and I've been trying to transform it into something else." "Something legal?" "Eventually. The process takes time, careful planning. You can't just walk away from this life. Too many people depend on it. Too many enemies are watching for signs of weakness." He sat heavily in the chair by the window, suddenly looking every one of his 35 years. "A wife was part of the plan, yes, but I never expected—" "What?" "I never expected to fall in love with her." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Part of me wanted to believe them, wanted to forget everything else and lose myself in the possibility that this beautiful, dangerous man actually cared about me. But I'd been naive once already. "How can I believe anything you say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything between us has been built on lies." "Not everything," he stood, moving toward me with predatory grace. "The way you feel when I touch you, that's real. The way your breath catches when I look at you, that's real. The way your heart races when I'm near, that's not something that can be faked." He was right, and we both knew it. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the manipulation, my body still responded to his presence like a magnet drawn to steel. But physical attraction wasn't love, and desire wasn't trust. "Physical chemistry isn't enough," I said, backing away from his approaching form. "Not for this, not for us." "Then what would be enough?" He stopped, giving me space but keeping his eyes locked on mine. "What would it take for you to forgive me?" "The truth. All of it. No more secrets. No more convenient omissions." I lifted my chin, drawing on reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. "And proof that I'm more than just a useful asset to you." "You want proof?" His smile was sharp, dangerous. "Tomorrow night, the Morettis are hosting a summit with the other families. It's the kind of meeting that could reshape the entire power structure of organized crime on the West Coast. I want you there." by my side, as my equal, not my decoration. That's insane. I don't know anything about your world. Then learn. Tonight, I'll teach you everything, the players, the politics, the stakes. And tomorrow, you'll help me navigate the most important negotiation of my career. He moved closer again, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made my pulse flutter. Partners, Lena, real ones. No more lies, no more games. And if I refuse, then you leave. I'll honor our original contract. Make sure Miguel's care continues, and you walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. His eyes were steady, honest in a way they'd never been before. But I don't think you'll refuse. Why not? Because you're already in too deep. Because you felt something in that warehouse when you thought I might die. Because despite everything I've done, everything I am, you're falling in love with me too. He was right, and I hated him for it. Somewhere between the fear and the fury, the luxury and the lies, I had started to care about Adrian Moretti in ways that went far beyond our contract. The thought of walking away, of never seeing him again, made my chest tight with something that felt suspiciously like grief. One night, I said finally, "You have one night to prove that you trust me enough to let me into your real world. If you hold back anything, if I sense even a hint of manipulation, I'm gone." Agreed. He extended his hand, formal as a business deal. Partners? I looked at his outstretched palm, at the scars across his knuckles that told their own story of violence and survival. Taking his hand would mean crossing a line I could never uncross, accepting a world where love and danger were inseparable. I took his hand. Partners. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of intensive education. Adrian didn't just tell me about his world. He immersed me in it completely. Names, faces, alliances, betrayals. The complex web of relationships that governed organized crime families across 3 states. He taught me to read the subtle signals, the way a man's posture could indicate loyalty or threat, how a seemingly casual conversation could be a negotiation for territory or tribute. "Salvatore Torino runs the docks," Adrian explained, pointing to a photograph of a silver-haired man with kind eyes. "He's been a family friend for 30 years, but his loyalty is contingent on profit margins. If the Santoros offer him a better deal, he'll switch sides without hesitation." "And her?" I pointed to a photograph of an elegant woman in her 40s. "Isabella Reyes, widow of Carlos Reyes, who used to control the casino operations. She inherited his territory and doubled the profits within 2 years. Brilliant, ruthless, and utterly without sentiment. She'll align with whoever offers the most strategic advantage." By evening, I had a working knowledge of the power structure Adrian navigated daily. It was like learning a foreign language, one where the wrong word could start a war, and silence could be more dangerous than speech. "You're a quick study," Adrian said as we prepared for the summit. He was impeccable in a charcoal suit that emphasized his dangerous elegance, while I wore a midnight blue dress that Elena had selected. Elegant but not flashy, expensive but not ostentatious. "Just remember, tonight you're not just my wife. You're my partner. Your opinions matter. Your insights are valuable. What if I say something wrong? You won't." His hands were steady as he fastened a sapphire necklace around my throat, one that matched my engagement ring, I realized. A public display of unity. "Trust your instincts, Lena. They've served you well so far." The summit was held at an exclusive private club that screamed old money and older power. As we entered the mahogany-paneled meeting room, I felt the weight of watching eyes, the careful assessment of people who made their living reading others for weakness or opportunity. Adrian kept me close, but not clinging, his hand a warm presence at the small of my back as he introduced me around the room. I smiled, made small talk, and watched everything with the intensity he'd taught me. These weren't just criminals. They were business people, politicians in their own right, operating within a system as complex and structured as any legitimate corporation. The meeting itself was a masterclass in negotiation, territorial disputes, profit-sharing agreements, responses to federal pressure. Everything was discussed in coded language that sounded like ordinary business to an outsider, but carried life-and-death implications for those who understood the subtext. Adrian was magnificent to watch in his element, calm, authoritative, able to find compromise, where others saw only conflict. When tensions rose between two rival factions, he stepped in with solutions that left everyone feeling like they'd won. When Isabella Reyes challenged his authority, he deflected with humor and respect that turned potential confrontation into collaboration. And through it all, he included me, not as window dressing, but as a genuine partner. When discussions turned to money laundering through legitimate businesses, he asked for my perspective on service industry operations. When the conversation touched on federal surveillance, he deferred to my insights about maintaining normal appearances under scrutiny. Mrs. Moretti raises an excellent point, Salvatore Torino said, after I'd suggested a more subtle approach to dock security. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. I felt a flush of pride at being taken seriously by these powerful, dangerous people. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like I belonged in Adrian's world, not as a decoration or a cover story, but as someone with value in her own right. The real test came near the end of the evening, when Vincent Santoro's replacement, a cold-eyed man named Rico Vega, made his play. With all due respect to the Moretti family's domestic arrangements, Vega said, his tone making it clear he had no respect at all. Some of us question whether Adrian is still capable of the hard decisions this business requires. A man with a civilian wife, a civilian life, it makes him soft, predictable. The room went dead quiet. This was a direct challenge, the kind that could only be answered with strength or blood. I felt Adrian tense beside me, saw his hand drift almost imperceptibly toward his jacket. But before he could respond, I spoke. "Mr. Vega, isn't it?" I kept my voice level, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "I think you misunderstand the nature of strength." "Do I?" "A man who fights only for himself is ultimately weak because he has nothing to lose but his own life. But a man who fights for something greater, for family, for the people he's sworn to protect, that man becomes genuinely dangerous because he's not just fighting for survival anymore. He's fighting for meaning." I stood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. "You see Adrian's marriage as a weakness. I see it as evolution, the ability to build something lasting in a world that destroys everything it touches. That's not soft, Mr. Vega. That's the ultimate display of power." The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then Isabella Reyes began to applaud, slowly, deliberately. Others joined in, and I realized I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't even known I was taking. "Well said, Mrs. Moretti," she murmured. "Well said indeed." Vega's face was flushed with humiliation, but he couldn't argue with the room's obvious approval. He'd challenged Adrian and been answered by his wife, a wife who'd proven herself articulate, intelligent, and absolutely devoted to her husband's cause. As the meeting disbanded, Adrian's arm slipped around my waist, pulling me against his side. "Brilliant," he murmured in my ear. "Absolutely brilliant." But it was Isabella Reyes who delivered the highest compliment as she passed us on her way out. "Your wife is an asset, Adrian. Guard her well." An asset. But this time, the word didn't sting, because I'd earned it through my own actions, my own choices, my own strength. In the car afterward, Adrian was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This one hummed with satisfaction, with something that felt dangerously like pride. "You realize what you did tonight?" he asked finally. "I helped you negotiate a business deal." "You did more than that." He turned to face me fully, his eyes intense in the passing streetlights. "You claimed your place in my world, not as my wife, not as my cover story, but as yourself, as my partner. Is that what I am? Your partner? If you want to be." His hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "The question is, do you want to be?" I thought of the evening we'd just shared, the respect in those dangerous eyes when I'd spoken, the feeling of belonging somewhere I'd never expected to fit. I thought of Adrian's face when Vega had challenged him, the way he'd trusted me to handle the situation, the pride in his voice when he'd called me brilliant. "Yes," I said simply. "I want to be your partner," even knowing what that means. The danger, the uncertainty, the moral compromises. Especially knowing what it means. I squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses earned through violence and survival. I'm not the same naive waitress who signed that contract, Adrian. You changed me. This world changed me. I can't go back to who I was before. I love who you are now, he said quietly. I love your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to be intimidated by things that would terrify most people. I love that you see possibilities where others see only problems. And I love that you trusted me enough to let me prove myself, that you didn't try to protect me from your world. You invited me into it. I turned to face him fully, seeing my own feelings reflected in his eyes. I love you, Adrian Moretti. The real you, all of you. Even the parts that are dark, that are dangerous? Especially those parts. I reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under my palm. Light without shadow is just glare. You need both for real beauty. He kissed me then, soft and reverent, like a man who'd found something precious he'd thought was lost forever. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. No more secrets, he promised. No more lies. If we're doing this, we're doing it as equals. Equals and partners, I agreed. In everything. The mansion looked different as we pulled through the gates, not like a prison anymore, but like a fortress. A place where we could build something real together, protected from a world that would destroy anything beautiful or pure. 3 months later, I stood on the same terrace where Adrian had first kissed me, watching the sun set over the Pacific. Miguel was beside me, healthy and strong, his treatments successful beyond our wildest hopes. He'd been skeptical about my marriage at first, but Adrian had won him over with patience and genuine affection. He makes you happy, Miguel observed, following my gaze to where Adrian was conducting business in his study. Really happy, not just pretending. He does. It was still something of a surprise, how completely my life had transformed. I'd gone from serving coffee in a diner to negotiating territories with crime bosses, from worrying about rent to managing a household staff, from being alone in the world to being part of something larger and more complex than I'd ever imagined. And the other stuff, the dangerous stuff, is part of who he is, part of who we are now. I turned to face my brother, seeing concern in his familiar features. I know it's not what you would have chosen for me, but it's what I'm choosing for myself. As long as you're choosing, he said simply. As long as you're not just surviving. Through the window, I could see Adrian finishing his call, his eyes already searching for me. When our gazes met, he smiled. The real smile, not the careful mask he wore for business. And I felt that familiar flutter of heat and affection and bone-deep certainty. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living fully and completely in a world that demanded everything I had to give and offered everything I'd never dared to dream of in return. When Adrian joined us on the terrace, he slipped his arms around me from behind, pulling me back against his chest. His lips brushed my temple, a casual gesture of affection that still made my pulse quicken. "Good day," I asked. "Better now." His voice was warm with contentment. "The Torino situation is resolved. The federal task force seems to be shifting their attention elsewhere, and my wife managed to negotiate a 15% increase in our casino profits." "Your wife is a quick learner." "My wife," he said, turning me in his arms so he could look at me properly, "is extraordinary." Miguel cleared his throat pointedly. "You know I'm still here, right?" "Then you can witness this," Adrian said, his eyes never leaving mine. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Lena Moretti, would you marry me?" I stared at him in confusion. "We're already married. We had a contract, a business arrangement." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took my breath away, a perfect solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the dying light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. "This time, I want to marry you for love, for real, for always." "Are you proposing to your own wife?" "I'm proposing to the woman I love, the woman who chose to stay when she could have left, who chose to fight when she could have run, who chose to trust when she had every reason not to." He dropped to one knee, holding the ring up like an offering. "Will you marry me, Lena? Not for money, not for convenience, not for strategy, but because we choose each other every day for the rest of our lives?" I looked down at this dangerous, beautiful man who'd turned my world upside down and given me a life I'd never imagined possible. Then I looked at Miguel, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears of happiness. Finally, I looked out at the ocean, endless and mysterious and full of possibilities. Yes, I said, extending my hand so he could slide the ring onto my finger beside the simple band I already wore. Yes, I'll marry you, again, for real, this time. As he stood and pulled me into his arms, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. I'd started this journey as a desperate waitress, looking for a way to save my brother. I was ending it as a woman who'd found her place in the world, her purpose, her home. And this time, when Adrian Moretti kissed me on our terrace overlooking the sea, I kissed him back with the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The second wedding was everything the first one wasn't. Intimate, meaningful, filled with people who mattered to us. Miguel walked me down the aisle. Elena cried through the entire ceremony. And even Marco cracked a smile when Adrian fumbled with the ring. But the most important difference was in the vows. This time, when I promised to love, honor, and cherish this man, I meant every word. And when he promised to protect, respect, and treasure me, I believed him completely. You may kiss your wife, the officiant said, and Adrian's smile was brilliant as he pulled me close. Hello, Mrs. Moretti, he murmured against my lips. Hello, husband, I whispered back. And this time, when he kissed me, it tasted like forever.